WNST. Got Caps games, Terps games, and it is my 25th anniversary next Tuesday. Hopefully it yields a Raven victory on Monday night in Foxborough. We're going to find out as we get up there. Luke Jones has been on the backfields all week long and celebrating 25 years. No one better to celebrate it with than this guy, one of my favorite guests and some of my favorite memories of my days at the vaulted NFL Films doing Monster Mondays with Brian Baldinger and the great Greg Cosell, who you can now follow on Twitter, and hundreds of thousands do at Greg Cosell out on Twitter. What's going on up there in Philadelphia, man, beside stock falling on Carson Wentz and the Eagles, huh?
Yeah, it's getting a little silly here, but it's good to talk to you, Nestor. I appreciate the kind words. Probably not deserved, but thank you.
You know what I really, first off, you know a lot about football, and you're fun to be around, and you have a self-deprecating style that I can appreciate. But more than that, when you do radio, you are better than most people at bringing X's and O's and film to life because you're not pointing at things like most football players and coaches. It is a difficult thing, and I'm going to ask you to do that for us in an audio format here to talk about Joe Flacco and the differences you've seen in this offense this year. I would say to the naked eye, to me, it's about the offensive line. If he's given time and guys are open, he's going to make throws and make plays. If he's running for his life as the gimp with a leg brace and having no time, he's going to look pretty horrible, as he did for long stretches when Marshall Yonda and some others weren't in there in October.
I think it was a combination. I think that your point about the O-line is absolutely true. I think if Joe was being honest, he would tell you there were games in which he was not particularly sharp mentally or physically, not seeing things at times, missing throws that we normally expect him to make. I think that this past game has sort of evolved, certainly since they made the coaching change with offensive coordinator. It's evolved into much more of a quick rhythm kind of passing game. We don't see necessarily the number of deep throws, and by deep throws I don't necessarily mean vertical routes. They'll take their shots every once in a while, but I'm talking about deep digs, the kinds of throws we associate with Joe through the years. It's a lot more sort of deeper slants, you know, what a lot of teams call slice. It's those kinds of throws. It's rhythm throws, much more than drop back, sit on that back foot, and we know Joe can make those throws as well as anybody in the league. But I think the offense has a little bit more of a rhythmic feel to it when it's going well.
And it's pass first, right? I mean, this is...
Well, it was this week. I mean, this was a week, and I have to tell you, I almost got the feeling watching the tape this week, particularly when I was finished with the first half, okay? They ran 41 plays, and I wasn't charting number of, you know, what was a run, what was a pass, other than I knew just from watching that they were clearly throwing the ball a lot. So in the first half of those 41 plays, Nestor, 34 called passes, 7 called runs, which most people would say puts you totally out of balance. But the Dolphins basically played zone coverage on almost every one of those 41 snaps, and I almost got the sense watching the tape that the Ravens coaching staff had a really good feel for the fact that the Dolphins would be playing zone coverage, and the route concepts just took it apart.
Well, and they were trying to protect those safeties, right? I mean, they had these young guys in there, and from a communication standpoint, the Ravens didn't get after them by throwing a couple of 80-yard bombs, you know? I mean, they went down the field, and they forced them, I mean, at one point with 16, 18-play drives. It's nutty. But that being said, you know, Flacco always says, I'll take what they give me. The Dolphins were giving it to him across the middle. They made Dennis Pitta look like Shannon Sharp in his prime, you know?
See, it wasn't so much. It's funny you say that. Their first 2 possessions were 16 plays, 142 yards, and they scored 2 touchdowns. It wasn't they were taking what they were being given in the sense that I think most people associate that like, hey, they were trying to go deep, but it wasn't there, so they threw it short. They were designing rhythmic route concepts that were all under 15 yards, and that was their plan going in. So there was a timing and rhythm feel to their offense. It was as if, hey, we understand what you're going to do defensively because the Dolphins featured what are your pretty basic zone coverage concepts: quarters, cover 3, cover 2. Cover 2 they played mostly on third and long, but they knew how to attack those, and that was the design. It wasn't so much, hey, we'll take what you give us. It was, we know what we're going to get, so we're going to attack it.
In seeing Flacco this year through the year, are you buying into the fact that this is improved and that they can go to Foxborough on Monday night and create some havoc up there?
Joe is one of those guys, and Nestor. I mean, I never worry about Joe. Has he had some bad games this year? He has, and I'm sure he'll be the first to admit it. But he's pretty much an even keel player. I don't look at this game and think, oh, well, gee, I wonder how Joe Flacco is going to play because, he might play. I don't think like that about Joe because I don't think he's really that kind of up and down player overall. Obviously every quarterback, I sit with my good buddy Ron Jaworski, every day during the football season. He tells me there's 2 games a year pretty much where you can count on a quarterback not being as sharp. But I think if you just accept that as kind of a given, I don't think there's a real up and down nature to the way Joe Flacco plays. Do you?
No, I think it's a lot about what happens around him in many cases, and he has not been aided by a running game that makes it easier on him.
Right. I mean, there's been they've had a couple of games where the run game was a factor, but for the most part, there's been no consistent run game element.
Well, you go into it knowing you're going to have to throw the ball to win, and I think Joe knows that's where it is, and there was a big meeting with him and Marty Morningwig that Harbaugh had no problem making public for some reason. After all the Ray Lewis criticisms of Flacco and all that, it was his best game of the year, and I think fans are reaching and saying, well, what made it so special? You might say, well, maybe part of that was the Dolphins' defense that made it special, right?
Well, you know what? It's an NFL game. It's one of 16. This is what the Dolphins chose to do, and you have to go out and you have to attack it and you have to execute, and they executed really, really well. Now, having said that, I don't think Bill Belichick is going to allow, and when I say allow, I'm not saying that means he's shutting it down. When I say allow, I don't think he's going to play high percentage zone, which, by the way, the Patriots don't do anyway, but I don't think he would do that and let the receivers just run freely off the line of scrimmage through zone coverage. I mean, in a sense, that's what the Dolphins did. Now, are there ways as well to help your receivers so they do get free releases? Of course. You can do a lot of different things, whether it's motion, whether it's stacks, whether it's bunch. There's ways to get receivers free off the line of scrimmage, but there's no way Bill Belichick is just going to say, okay, we'll sit back in zone and you can run free. That's not going to happen.
Pitta, Wallace, Smith, all to some degree damaged goods, either physically or by age or by being on their 4th team in the case of Wallace. These guys have worked out pretty well. I don't think anybody would have thought Pitta was ever going to get on the field. Certainly Steve Smith getting back on the field and being a factor of any kind. And Mike Wallace was damaged goods, right? I mean, he just was what he was working on his 4th team.
Well, I think Mike Wallace, quite honestly, I think people's view of him got raised to an unrealistic expectation when he got signed in Miami, and they signed him to be a quote-unquote number 1. Mike Wallace is not. Mike Wallace is a speed guy, and he can run crossing routes and then run away from people. But other than that, he's not what you think of as a multi-dimensional number 1.
Well, in this case, we got Dennis Pitta playing tight end after 5 other guys have been drafted and Ben Watson. It's an amazing story. What do you see from him? Does he look the same as he did 3 years ago to you?
That's hard to answer because I don't remember exactly 3 years ago. But
I remember 3 years ago
they looked okay this week. I mean, I thought that I think the 13-yard touchdown, which I guess, did that end the first possession or the second possession? I lose track. They scored so often early.
He was the first and the third, I believe. Right. Dixon went second, I believe.
The 13-yard touchdown was one of the first 2 possessions for sure. I thought that was a really nice route. He ran a beautiful route to widen his release to win, and I thought this week he looked pretty good. I mean, again, there's so many elements that go into plays that just because a guy catches balls doesn't automatically mean, wow, what an unbelievable performance. But the fact is, he works the middle of the field predominantly, and that's where I would say in the first half, I would say 85%, if not more, of the completions were between the numbers inside the hashes. I mean, that's where the throws were, and that's where they beat the Dolphins defense, and that's where Pitta works.
And that's probably where the Patriots will not let them work on Monday night. Greg Cosell joining us here from NFL Films. You can follow his journey out on Twitter and everything that NFL Films does on the breaking down of tape with Jaw and the Edge and all the good stuff. All the 37 years now, right up there. 37
years, yep.
Crazy. All right, so out of these 37 years, it probably feels like Brady's been there for 25 of them, but it's only been 15. 19 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then the Gronkowski thing that we've spent a large stretch of this week talking about 3-4 weeks ago. It's, well, you got to go up there and deal with Jamie Collins on one side of the ball and Gronkowski on the other, and the Ravens were mangled up and very, very injured on defense and a lot of question marks. And now you go up there where Suggs is playing, Yonda's playing, Doomerville's playing, and there's no Gronkowski for Brady to rely on. How does that change what they want to do on Monday night, Greg?
Well, I think it certainly does. Just because, Bill Belichick, he was one of the early guys who sort of understood and saw how the use of 2 tight ends aligning all over the formation, not just in the traditional way where they line up on the line of scrimmage. He was one of the first guys who really saw how that really impacted defensive deployment, because tight ends, much more than wide receivers, Nestor, really dictate defense. Wide receivers pretty much line up as wide receivers, whether they're in the slot, they're wide receivers. Tight ends change defensive deployment because they're tight ends. And the first thing you have to decide is, are you playing your base personnel or are you playing your nickel? And then what happens when a tight end splits outside? So, Bill's really good at that. And when you have 2 of them, first it was Hernandez and Gronkowski. Now it was Bennett and Gronkowski. And it really makes it difficult to defend. Now without that, their offense, it will look different. And we haven't had a large enough sample size without Gronk to say, hey, this is what they are. So it's hard to answer that because I think they're still trying to figure that out, and they're obviously playing against a very good defense this week.
Well, in the last couple of weeks, they've had a little bit of the JV units out there, and especially from a defensive standpoint with just hitting the eject button literally like hyperspace and asteroids just off to Siberia or Cleveland, do not pass go, and then they're going to lace up and play half a season without a guy who was one of their best players.
Yeah, and they're going to look at a defense that has been terrific against the run. One of the things we do on the matchup show is we start to look at the last 4 weeks every week, because that's where teams are right now. So sometimes statistics over the course of a season can be skewed. A team can start off really well and then become bad. A team can start off poorly and then improve. So when you look at the way the Ravens, for instance, have played the run over the last 4 weeks, they've been outstanding versus the run. And their 2 interior guys, Pierce and Williams, those guys to me have been sensational. But so this team plays the run really, really well. And I love what they've done in the secondary with Webb at safety, and he's now playing some snaps in the slot, which he can still do because he's a corner. So, I think that there's a lot of versatility to what this defense brings to the table.
In the case of Tom Brady, forcing him to pass, good idea or bad?
Well, it's not a matter of forcing, because they're going to throw, and they're going to throw when they want to throw. So it's not a matter of, stop the run, force them to throw on 3rd and 9. They'll throw proactively. So the issue is, what's the best way then to defend it? It's very difficult to blitz Brady unless it's a real unless you do it selectively, and unless you have a great feel for their protection, and unless, and a great feel for their play call, which, sometimes that happens.
And you don't get a free run on him very often, right?
No, you don't.
Helmet on helmet, that's the beauty of how he stays upright for 15 years, right?
Yeah, you don't. So most teams don't blitz a ton. And as I said, that doesn't mean you won't see Dean Pease blitz, because he obviously worked for Bill Belichick and probably has a pretty good feel of the strengths and weaknesses of Brady and the offense. But having said that, it's not going to be 50% blitz. So one of the things you really have to do from a coverage standpoint is disrupt coverage, and there's many ways to do that. So when Brady hits his back foot and wants to throw on timing and rhythm, that he has to hesitate just for half a beat. That's enough in the NFL. So that's one of the things that teams that are effective, and not many are, but that are effective can do with Tom, is that they just cause half a beat of hesitation in his precise timing and rhythm.
You can follow everything Greg Cosell does out on Twitter at Greg Cosell, as well as at NFL Matchup, along with Jaws ESPN. And I saw Jaws gave a great speech here in Baltimore last year. We had a good time one morning. You're still with Merrill Hodge as well. 37 years now at NFL Films, also the co-author of The Games That Changed the Game. Pimp your book a little bit. Come on, throw me some. I saw it out on Twitter. We haven't talked about that yet.
God, we did that about 6 or 7 years ago, and essentially what we did is we took 7 games that in our mind really impacted sort of football tactics and philosophy going forward, but we used those games really to get into people and tactics and concepts and schemes that changed the game. So, for instance, we dealt with Don Coryell. We dealt with Bill Walsh. We dealt with Buddy Ryan. We dealt actually with Bill Belichick's approach in the Super Bowl when they beat the Rams, when the Rams were heavily favored.
I remember talking to you about that at length. That was when we said it at the Super Bowl or somewhere. I mean that's an intro. That's maybe the best story that I've seen told, right?
We dealt with cover 2, which everybody thinks of as a pass defense. Covers 2 actually started in the late 60s in college, Nestor, when Bud Carson, the old Steelers D coordinator with the Steel Curtain and then was coached in the league for years and years, one of the great defensive minds, he started cover 2 in the late 1960s when he was at Georgia Tech to defend the option, because what it did is it put both corners up on the line of scrimmage to really give you a 9-man box to defend the option. That's how cover 2 started.
All right. Well, Greg, you're always a wealth of knowledge. We'll see how this thing turns out on Monday night. I'm sure I will see you in Houston again. Every time I show up on NFL Top 10, I get a text, I get a tweet. I mean, lady was sitting next to me on an airplane, no kidding, about a month ago, and it popped up and she elbowed me. She's like, "Hey, that's you." And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cool, at 38,000 feet over Iowa somewhere that happens. Hey, man, keep the faith. The Ravens are still in this thing. We got a heck of a season here and a nice finish. Last thing for you, real quick. Give me one player that you've loved watching play football this year on tape that maybe, last year you didn't notice him as much. Somebody that's really made a stride.
Wow. Those are always tough questions because I sit here and grind away watching tape and God, I'm looking at the teams right now.
Derek Carr, anything?
Well, but I think I'm not necessarily surprised by Derek Carr's growth as a player. I mean, I sort of would have expected that.
Dak Prescott in this system that Dallas has?
I think everybody's surprised because he's doing things that he did not do in college. So that's surprising everybody. He's throwing with accuracy far more than he showed in college. So look, I'm sure that there is that person who thought he'd be a really good starter. So I'm not going to say that no one thought this, but he's playing differently now than he did in college for the most part. Boy, that's a tough question. I'll tell you one guy who I loved. It started last year. I loved him coming out of college, and I think he's really good, although he's with a passing game right now that's struggling for many reasons, but I'm a big Stephon Diggs guy.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we'll take that here in the great state of Maryland. Greg, take care of yourself. At Greg Cosell's the way to find him out on Twitter. It's always fun to talk some football with you. Thanks for the time.
All right, Nestor, appreciate it.
I know he's busy. He's getting that NFL matchup together. You can follow him out on Twitter there or at his name, Greg Cosell. Hundreds of thousands do. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox. That is brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, working off those cookies and the eggnog and the pumpkin pie and all that good stuff as well. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me anytime, anywhere. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNST TV channel. We'll be at Buffalo Wild Wings and Owings Mills on Monday night, giving away the best seat in the house, as well as hosting the Blazing Wing Eating Challenge during the Ravens-Patriots game. Hope to see you out there. Pete will be out there. I'll be in Foxborough. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.